an issue of Spidey Super Stories, and my parents had to, my mom would read the comic to me, and eventually I was, I really wanted to read it myself, so, I would always ask what words were and stuff, and, this is what they're telling me, because I was 3 years old at this time. And so I started learning to read at 3, because I wanted to read these Spider-Man comics. And, that was, a long time love affair with comics. I dropped a little bit out in the mid-'80s, like in middle school, I guess. And then when I jumped back in, we were on a trip, and we stopped at a gas station, and I saw Secret Wars #1. And it had all those superheroes on the cover, it had Spider-Man and Wolverine and Hulk and Captain America and Storm, and I was just like, what? It blew my kid's mind, and so I picked that up, and that was when I really, really became passionate about comic books, and it was definitely mostly the superheroes growing up. We'd get like some of like the Gold Key and Dell comics of the day, which were a lot of like licensed comics for stuff like Hot Stuff and Richie Rich and Casper the Friendly Ghost. But really it was the superhero stuff, and Spider-Man in particular, that drove my interest in comics.
Well, with me, in Britain, growing up in the, I was born in 77, so growing up in the early 80s, there was still a culture where kids were expected to read comics. And you sort of started off, but you'd get one from the newsagents, like every week, with your pocket money, and it's like, you'd start off with these sort of humor anthologies like the Beano, which were just a collection of like one-page humor strips about, usually about kids with strange quirks. And you'd sort of graduate to the sort of adventure comics, and 2000 AD was kind of a very well written, a very well drawn adventure comic. It was like one of many like it, of like, short, action-packed strips, out every week with, all of your favorite characters. So that was, and I'd have encountered 2000 AD at around like the age of 9 and been very kind of enamored of it immediately. When I encountered like superheroes, Marvel in particular, and here's where my story kind of dovetails a little with Sean, is the very first superhero comic I'd have read that would have been Secret Wars 1, but the UK reprint. So it would have been like a reprint of issue 1 on like slightly bigger paper. But the same thing of like all of the Marvel superheroes in one place, and like all of them standing in a line and saying their names, so you knew who that were, which is like, thank you, Jim Shooter, for that, because it reads very strange now, where like, everybody introduces themselves, but it's, when you're like, when you're however many years old and like looking at superheroes for the first time. And I still went for ages thinking like, getting the names and the powers wrong, and thinking like, Colossus had like mental powers and stuff, and it's just, you pick these things up. But that would have been around certainly when I fell in love with superhero comics. I think it wasn't so much falling in love with comics as not falling out of love with comics when I was expected to. There's a certain point in your teenage years where you're expected to stop reading comics, and I didn't, because I enjoyed it too much, so, it was more that for me.
Yeah, I don't remember a time that I didn't have a comic. I remember comics from when I was very young. I grew up in the golden era where you could go to a garage sale and buy, a stack of 10 comics for less than $1.
Somebody's mom is selling their childhood for pennies on the dollar.
And I would take advantage of that. There was a flea market guy that used to sell grocery sacks full of 50 comics for $5, and you could buy a sack of DC or a sack of Marvel comics for $5. And we'd go, and I would always say, can I go to the flea market and we can buy that? And I bought that, and I think I said this last time we did a panel. I bought those comics, and I bought a coffin from him one time. Those are the two things I bought.
Was it a coffin full of comics, though?
No, well, not
because that would have been a good deal.
But then I put comics in it.
Oh, there you
Mom
go.
was not. And this was not
the longest box.
This was not just a coffin. This thing had worm tracks in it. It had been in the ground at some point. It was a used car, and I used to tell people that we dug my aunt up to take the gold fillings out of her teeth.
Can you talk a little bit about why you saw that coffin and said, I need to own this?
Yeah, I don't think you've told me this story before, Colin, because this is new.
Any one of you guys that saw a coffin for like $10, you're like, I want that coffin. Any of them.
The used one at that.
Well, you
Well,
don't.
you replace your bed.
That's right.
Of course.
But anyway, and you know, I was always reading the Charlton horror comics and horror anthology comics I was reading, but the comic that made me love comics was Micronauts number 7, which was I remember getting it at the grocery store, and I vividly remember sitting in the back room of my dad's office, and I read that comic over and over and over again, and I bought it because it was a Micronauts comic, and I liked the toys. But it was my first exposure to world building, because it wasn't these weren't characters that had a preconceived backstory. This was Bill Mantlo just taking this and creating a universe, and I fell in love with that. And then not long after I read that, we went on a road trip, and we stopped at gas stations, and I kept begging my dad to stop at every Stuckey's, because Stuckey's sold 3 packs of comics in little plastic bags. And sometimes you could move them and see what's in the middle. And I was just on the hunt for any Micronaut, because I couldn't find issue 8. I got issue 7, and then who knows what the next issue would be I read. But yeah, Micronauts number 7, that's the comic that made me love comics.
Everybody has their deep cuts, things that they're a fan of that aren't necessarily the headline names, the Incredible Hulks, the Amazing Spider-Man, and so on. Do you have any particular deep cuts that you were a big fan of, that you felt like you were the only one of your friends that was reading this, or you get to, you know, talking with other pros at conventions like this, and you feel like, you know, there was this book that you were into that didn't get the kind of play that the big name books got? Anything like that? Any particular deep cuts that you feel like you have a special love for that other people didn't appreciate enough?
If you want to take this panel down that path, that's all we can talk about the rest of the day, because that's pretty much everything I love is a deep cut comic. I mean, Black Wolf, which was a book Marvel put out in the 90s, I still think Black Wolf, I've gone so many times. That's probably why I don't get any work there anymore, because I pitched Black Wolf too often.
Well, the reason that I would never get any work at Marvel is I would just do nothing but pitch Nightcat over and over again.
But no, Black Wolf was one. Clandestine, I thought was amazing in the 90s from Marvel. US 1.
There's a story of Cullen Bunn.
Yeah, US 1, which was a trucker comic. And one of the first things I ever pitched to Marvel, and the biggest mistake they have ever made, Tony Moore and I pitched a US 1 reboot to Marvel, and it went, you know, through the process, which was US 1 was a trucker, and he had a CB radio in his head. He had a bionic CB radio. And so this is 15 years ago we pitched it. He had a bionic CB radio, and he was hired to drive take his truck to take a hidden shipment. He didn't know what he had. And it was him and his little a chimpanzee companion that was dressed as Captain America. And they just drove across the country dealing with stuff, and they found it was a dead watcher they had in the back. But they didn't know that at the time. And then eventually they did the dead watcher bit. But that was taken from my US 1 pitch. I go on and on. I love all those. It's usually the really obscure stuff, the stuff that gets canceled instantly, is the stuff I like the most, which is great since most of my books get canceled pretty easily.
I mean, you mentioned the Micronauts earlier. I was always a big fan of Micronauts: The New Voyages, which is like, what if the Micronauts were like from Vertigo or something? It was like this kind of really like, I'm a huge fan of the writer Peter B. Gillis, who is sort of off to the sides. He's never kind of mentioned when people talk about like the great Marvel writers, but he did this incredible run on Doctor Strange, which, you know, remains an influence. And like, he did Micronauts and New Voyages, which was like this weird sort of poetic take on the Micronauts, and it ended up with, I think it ended up with them all like jumping into a pit and dying, and like, or melting or something to kind of bring back love or something like that.
They bring back the whole universe, not just love.
I don't know, it's been a while.
It's just one facet of the universe.
It's been a while, somebody mentioned love. I think it was Acra year, got really into that. But yeah, no, yeah, they bring back the hallmark for us. And then he did Strike Force Moriturai, which certainly the first year of that is just incredible comics. I think after they don't die, it starts to lose its way a little bit. The whole point of the comic is that they're superheroes, but like within the year they're gonna die, and then they don't die. So it's like, you know, I felt slightly cheated. Some of them do, a couple of them do, by the main character. Spoilers. In terms of like non-novel stuff, I don't know, this might not make any sense. Hands up, anyone who knows 2000 AD in particular? A couple of you are gonna get this. Out of all the 2000 AD characters, like my secret favorite is Angel, which is ran for like 6 episodes in like the late 70s. And this was another, and you mentioning US1 remind me of that because he's a guy who crashes a super sophisticated jet plane, and the computer from the jet aircraft embeds itself in him, and they can't get it out. It's like in his shoulder, so his shoulder's covered in like circuitry. And his costume from that on is he's just shirtless all the time, so you can see like, you know, his shoulder. And his superpower that they did for 6 issues is that the computer kind of wants to fly him like a plane. So he can technically, and it like controls his muscles, but he can't take off. But the whole series is him falling from various heights and like landing on his feet and like trying to solve a mystery through the medium of falling out of buildings and out of planes and like from a space shuttle. And it's like, and every time it's like, will this be the height that kills me? It's like, no, you've established you can like fall from any height. It's like, so yeah, that lasted 6 issues, and then it went away forever. And I keep trying to bring it back, and they won't let me.
I've had all this time while these two have been talking to try to think of some deep cuts, but I mean, I was really meat and potato superheroes guy for a while. I grew up in a town of 1,200 people in northern Wisconsin, so, you know, outside of the newsstand, we didn't really have a lot of variety. I mean, I remember I would pick up a weird thing here or there, like Crystal Warrior. I remember liking it. I don't remember a single thing about it. Amethyst, Princess of Gemworld, I really liked that. I thought there was nothing else like it, you know, on the stands at that point, you know, and it was really cool. But, you know, because we had so little access to comic books where I was raised, so my parents owned a hardware and sporting goods store, and I talked them into letting me take an old magazine rack from the grocery store next door that they were just gonna throw away. And I started selling comic books. I opened an account with a distributor. I was, I think, 15 at the time. And that expanded out into like a, you know, a 200 square foot section of the store. And so in the 90s, you know, that was really when I was awakened to a lot of new material. That was, you know, around the time when Vertigo started up. I remember Light and Darkness War by Cam Kennedy, and I forget the writer. But they're known for doing some Star Wars books at Dark Horse as well. But there was a lot of the epic comics of the time that I was a huge Gru fan, you know, and just all those little nooks and crannies of DC and Marvel that you know, they, in the 90s, like Marvel had sub-imprints of sub-imprints. They had Marvel UK, and then they had Marvel UK something, and I forget what they were all called, but you know, I remember really liking Death's Head back then, who's come back as kind of a cult classic character. But really, like, yeah, I was just such a sucker for Spider-Man that was my thing. You know, it was really like it got into the, you know, then I got into the indie stuff like Hate and Strangers in Paradise and Stray Bullets and stuff like that. But I don't really think those are deep cuts at all. I think, you know, to me a lot of that stuff isn't a deep cut because I was ordering it all from the catalog at that point.